Hello, everybody. I'm David Schuster. Welcome back to Rebel HQ, and thanks for joining us. Some of the questions I'm getting the most these days from family and friends related to my work is, will Donald Trump be convicted in his New York hush money trial? If he is convicted, will he be sent to prison? And third, what does this mean for the November election with Joe Biden? Well, based on my decades of experience covering trials, everything that I've read in terms of transcripts and some reporting on the Trump case specifically, I think I'm on pretty solid ground with the following. Donald Trump, in my view, will be convicted on at least some of the 34 felony charges that he is facing. He will not be sent to jail, even though he has convictions out of this case. And he will lose the 2024 election to Joe Biden. And Donald Trump not going to jail will actually help cement Biden's victory. So a lot to unpack here, and let's get into it. And let's start, of course, with the criminal trial. Donald Trump is facing 34 Class E felony charges. This is the lowest level of felony charges in New York State. And this, of course, stems from alleged falsification of business records involving the payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels, $130,000 that was made through Michael Cohen. And the payments were made in 2016, just before the election, after the Access Hollywood tape came out in which Trump talked about grabbing women by the... And the Trump campaign felt that if the Stormy Daniels story were to emerge, it would literally sink his 2016 campaign. So they bury it. Trump wins the 2016 election. And then we find out, oh, well, there were these payments made. And oh, by the way, it seems like he was entering false records, essentially falsifying his business records in order to pull this off. There are a couple things the jury's going to have to determine. First of all, is it credible? Is the evidence clear and overwhelming that Donald Trump, in fact, falsified business records? And to me, that's a no-brainer. It is clear just based on the documents and the evidence and the checks and everything presented at trial, the testimony that, yes, Donald Trump and the Trump Organization, they falsified his business records. But in order to convict Donald Trump on these charges, the jury is going to be told they have to find a second crime that Donald Trump was trying to cover up. And this is where the debate is in terms of the instructions to the jury. Will the judge say specifically what that crime is? Does the jury have to imagine, oh, well, Donald Trump was defrauding the election? That's the secondary crime. Will the jury be left to their own devices to try to figure this out? And oh, by the way, there are two members of the jury who are corporate attorneys who might be sticklers for the secondary threshold of finding a second crime that Donald Trump was trying to cover up. So yes, there's a lot of argument back and forth about whether, in fact, the jury will find both elements in order to convict Donald Trump. But to me, the evidence is clear, and I believe that the jury will overwhelmingly find at least that Donald Trump committed at least some of the felony charges with which he is charged. Again, 34 felony charges. My bet is that Donald Trump will be convicted. The jury has to be unanimous. And so I think the jury will be unanimous on some of the charges. I think there'll be a hung jury on some of the other charges, and perhaps a few charges where maybe Donald Trump is not convicted or the jury finds not guilty. But my guess would be convictions on several charges, hung jury on several others, and maybe a few where he's found not guilty. So given Donald Trump getting convicted, in my estimation, then what? Well, each of the charges, when convicted, carries a possible sentence of 4 years in jail. But again, it can be discretionary to the judge. And there's several things that New York judges are allowed to take into consideration. First, the severity of the crime. Who was defrauded? Well, you could argue the American people were defrauded of this information, and maybe that warrants jail time. But if you look at cases like these, falsification of business records, approximately 10% of all cases like this actually lead to jail time. And in those 10% of cases, almost all of them involve other charges where a defendant is also found guilty, or it's a case where the defendant has prior convictions. In this particular case with Donald Trump, he does not have prior convictions. Yes, he has all the other federal indictments and the state charges in Georgia, but Donald Trump has never before been convicted of a crime, so he is technically a first-time offender. Secondly, Donald Trump is 77 years old. And the judge himself has telegraphed that based on Donald Trump's political standing and standing as a former president of the United States, Judge Merchan does not want Donald Trump to go to jail. Remember when Donald Trump was violating the gag order? There were the 10 examples of Donald Trump being found to have violated the gag order. And the judge said, I don't want to put you, a former president, and a 2024 presidential nominee in jail. That's not something I want to do. Well, in my view, given that the judge has discretion, the judge will say, you know what? He's a first-time offender. He's old. We'll make him pay some money back. There'll be some fines. He'll be put on probation. But I'm almost certain the judge is not going to send Donald Trump to jail, even if Donald Trump is convicted, and even if he's convicted on most of the counts. And oh, by the way, even if Donald Trump gets convicted, there's going to be a lengthy appeals process. And even if the judge wanted to sentence Donald Trump, it's likely that would not start until the appeals process has been exhausted. Now, as far as the sentencing, once there's a conviction in New York State on felony charges, the sentencing has to happen usually between 1 and 2 months. The judge will ask all of the parties to issue reports for the sentencing hearing. There'll be a sentencing hearing. So let's just assume Donald Trump is convicted the first week in June. There'll be a sentencing hearing perhaps July or August, right around the time of the political conventions. And then that's it. Well, then there'll be an appeals process. But again, Donald Trump, in my view, is not going to get convicted. The judge is going to use his discretion with Donald Trump as a first-time offender and also as a former president of the United States. The judge does not want to go down in history as the first judge in U.S. history to send a former president to jail. Now, what does this all mean as far as the November election? Well, there are a couple things here. My theory on all of this is that if Donald Trump were actually to be sent to jail, sent to prison, enough Americans would be so sort of kind of revolted by it, revolted by perhaps the justice system being so heavy-handed over, trying to hide an affair or whatever most Americans see, that Donald Trump would actually be seen as a martyr. He would be seen as a victim, as he's been claiming, and then that could rally and energize Trump supporters and actually help tip the balance and give Donald Trump a victory in 2024 in November. But by Donald Trump not being sent to jail, by simply having a felony conviction, being able to say Donald Trump is a convicted felon, but he's not going to jail, that will still damage Donald Trump. There's something like 10% of all Republicans who say they would never vote for a convicted felon for president of the United States. Now, some of them may change their mind, but I think enough of them will peel off that that'll make a huge difference in November. And oh, by the way, at a certain point, the Biden campaign is going to drop billions of dollars to remind the American people that the economy is going gangbusters. Joe Biden created 15 million jobs in the first 3 years in office. Donald Trump, in his first 3 years in office, created only 6 million jobs. The stock market just reached 40,000, another record. It has grown by 35% since Joe Biden took office. So by the way, inflation is down, grocery prices, gas prices are also going down. And when the Biden campaign and the Democrats are able to drop billions of dollars in ads on that, never mind on Donald Trump's legal problems, in my view, that's enough for Joe Biden to win several key swing states and eventually win the Electoral College. If Donald Trump, though, is sent to jail, I think all bets are off. And at that point, the electorate becomes so inflamed and so many Republicans think, oh, this is unfair, that a lot of people who simply want to burn down our institutions, burn down the courts, burn down our government, they will then say, okay, enough, I'm going to burn everything down by voting for Donald Trump. In my view, the best thing that could happen for Democrats politically is for Donald Trump to be a convicted felon, not face jail time, but have Democrats be able to hang in all those campaign commercials. Here's Donald Trump's criminal, illegal behavior that he was engaged in, and then have the debate argued over policies, what should be done to help the economy, to improve education, America's standing in the world. We face some very clear choices between Donald Trump and Joe Biden on foreign policy. Joe Biden believes in stability, government engagement, the U.S. using its military and economic power to promote democracy around the world. Donald Trump is very much of an American first isolationist and believes that American troops should stay home, that the U.S. should not get involved militarily in events overseas, whether it's Taiwan or whether it's Ukraine. Some very clear choices. And again, the choice will ultimately be between government stability, Joe Biden, and government instability, draining the swamp, burning everything down with Donald Trump. Just on that, in my view, most Americans are going to pull the lever and vote for Joe Biden, and Donald Trump will be defeated. But when you add to that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, I think it pushes the numbers even more. And in the end, I don't think that the Electoral College Biden victory will be all that close. We won't be talking about 3 or 4 states here that make the ultimate difference. It'll be much more than that. And hopefully, a clear and decisive Biden victory will also tamp down whatever temptation Donald Trump and his supporters may have to claim fraudulent election. The election was rigged. The election was stolen. Well, most Americans didn't believe it the last time, and while most Republicans may believe it about the last time now, again, if the results are clear and decisive, I think the election will be accepted and our threat to democracy will finally go away. You may say, oh, David Shuster, you're way too optimistic. We're headed for a civil war. We're headed for all sorts of trouble no matter what happens with Donald Trump. I agree. I think all possible scenarios are on the table, and that's what makes this particular era so frightening. But again, based on everything that I've read, based on all the experience I have in covering trials and covering politics, I believe Joe Biden's going to win the November election. Donald Trump will be convicted in his New York criminal trial. The other trials that he's facing will not start until after the election, and Donald Trump will not be sent to prison, as much as many critics would love to see him in that orange jumpsuit. But take some satisfaction. Donald Trump not going to jail will also mean, in my view, that he will not be going to the White House. Anyway, that's my take. Eager to see your comments in the comment section here on YouTube. I'm sure we'll get a lot of provocative statements about all of this. I look forward to reading it all. Thanks again for watching Rebel HQ. I'm David Schuster.